Welcome, everybody. We are here today for the Arts Allies conversation as part of the We Out Here Festival. I am Sade. I'm the founder and CEO of Sour Lemons. We are a charity addressing systemic racism in the cultural sector, and we're based in London. I have four incredible panelists here today who I'm really excited to hear from. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over and invite you all to introduce yourselves and what brought you here today. I'm going to begin with Cassie.
I'm Cassie Kinoshi, so I am a composer, alto saxophonist, and I work in various fields and various industries in music, whether that be performing jazz or writing for theatre or writing for stage or writing for dance, etc. And film. So I guess I was brought to this conversation because a lot of the stuff that I do write about for my band, Seed, in particular, is addressing things to do with racism and the injustices in particular in the UK, in an attempt to bring these issues to light, because a lot of these things aren't really spoken about. And for me, I guess that kind of relates in this sense like to the idea of like rupture, because I think a lot of the stuff I do write about sometimes can be viewed or is interpreted as problematic by people that aren't used to hearing stuff like that. But then also I feel I've been brought to this conversation because as a musician, and especially as an improvising musician, those spaces as performers are really a healing space, an expressive space where we can connect with each other and just share our feelings and thoughts on certain things, really.
Thank you. I've got loads of follow-up questions for you, but I'm going to invite you to pass it on. So we practice radical generosity, right? When we take up space, we create space for others. So throughout the conversation today, we're going to be passing the baton to each other to share who we are. So who would you like to pass it on to, Cassie?
To Alya, I'd love to hear what you have to say, as always.
Hi, Cassie. It's lovely to see your face.
Yeah.
I'm Alya Al-Sulanti. I'm a dramatic soprano, improvising vocalist, composer, and for reasons that are a very long story, I also run a grime label and do electronic production. So yeah, I have been on my own journey. You know, I've been on a journey where I think I didn't realize that I was struggling with the structures in which I was trying to create music and art until it was really, really shown to me in a very explicit way. And I don't know why I failed to see it. It just felt like all the time I thought, you know, I was crazy. I thought I was being maybe sensitive, or I couldn't put my finger on why these spaces felt so alienating, particularly, you know, from an opera point of view, or even, to be honest, even from an improvising and jazz point of view. I couldn't really ever put my finger on it, because I guess I had this quite idealistic view that in the arts, we're insulated from these things. You know, I mean, I come from a background of Iraqi, and you know, I have a background of seeing the worst that governments can do to you, regardless of your rights, you know, and I always thought that the arts were a safe haven from these things. And it's been a painful discovery to realize that actually that isn't the case over the last sort of 7-8 years, and to realize that how many times maybe that I have been tokenized in the work that I do, and how important it is to start to carve out our own spaces, you know, and how to create structures that support art that isn't, I guess, yeah, white and of the dominant culture. And I guess how I got here was because I never shut up about it now. And so someone must have told someone that this woman doesn't shut up about it now. And increasingly my art projects have, and my music projects have explored the idea of the complex identity of people who tend to be homogenized, whether that's refugees from Syria or Muslim women and so on. So a lot of what I try to do is to create a multi-dimensional communication and viewpoint perspective of people who normally are just statistics or figures or generalized about and stereotyped in a way which I think dehumanizes them. So yeah, that's me.
Wow, I knew this conversation was going to be delicious. I have like a million follow-ups. I'm a bad moderator. Why did they pick me? They take us like we're not even here. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, it's a real privilege hearing you speak, and yeah, my brain's going. Who would you like to pass it over to?
I'd like to pass it to my Alice.
Hello, thanks, Alya. It's always amazing hearing you talk. So my name is Zawadzi. I'm a singer, violinist, composer, and I work in a sort of quite wide variety of fields within music and also sometimes kind of dipping into theatre and film type stuff, but also quite a lot of educational type projects and also I guess what you would call community outreach projects. I'm on a journey like everyone is, but certainly with regards to some of the issues that we're going to be exploring today, I'm not somebody who's affected by racism, but I would like to keep expanding on how to best respond to the issues that keep coming up and that do need to be addressed, because we're collectively missing out on a lot as a society the longer that this goes on. I think part of my journey that's brought me here is working through a beautiful organization called Play for Progress, which is like an organization which befriends young unaccompanied minors who are seeking asylum in the UK. We're based down in Croydon, and that's in affiliation with the Refugee Council. It's an amazing project. I've been working with them kind of on and off, I guess, for about 5 or 6 years now. And it's been really incredible to witness the very real changes in some of these people's lives. But not just actually the young people that we're working with, but also within the team. This kind of interaction is good for everybody. Everybody learns, everybody grows. And I think it's something that I think like I've always been sort of aware to some degree or another. Like the Polish side of my family came here as refugees, but a very long time ago, and obviously in a completely different context, for example, than yours did, Alya. But it's a narrative that that's kind of always been kind of at the back of my head in different ways, and it's a repeating pattern that I see. And I want to listen to all of you today and learn.
Thank you so much, Alice. That was really beautiful hearing you speak, and particularly I'm sure a lot of people listening can resonate to your vulnerability of being on a journey and how like we are all on different parts of our journey. So I'm hoping today we can explore some of the pinch points where we're currently at, where we have been, and the practices that show up in our everyday that can help other people. Last but not least.
Hey everybody, I'm Aditi Jaganathan, and I'm a musician in disguise. I don't make music. I make music through chatting, and keeping it real. I think music has like inspired me infinitely, like in the way that I move through the world, in the way that I conversate with other humans, in the way that I teach in many of the educational spaces that I facilitate. And it's that spirit of jazz, you know, that essence of improvisation, of being in a kind of collective communal space, of being open to dancing with each other's ideas and each other's lived experiences, with that kind of spirit of openness that I think is so integral to a lot of the conversations that we're having pertaining to race, gender, decolonization, and all of these different things. And I think music teaches us so much. You know, I really do believe that music has all of the answers, like that music holds a cartography or many cartographies of what freedom looks like, but we just need to listen to it deeper. And I guess that's what's brought me to this space, right? Like, as a deep listener of, to, with, and through music, I've created a course called Rhythm, Race and Revolution that basically looks at the social, economic and political conditions that make different kind of musical cultures, that have enabled different musical cultures around the world to flourish. And one of my students invited me on a Stance podcast, and we were talking about rhythm, race and revolution and the power of music to heal, to open, and also to kind of be used as a force for justice, right? And like the fact that we're having this conversation as, you know, Palestinians are fighting for their freedom, which is what they've been doing like for decades and decades and decades, I think is really, really poignant and pertinent. And it kind of brings to the fore like how important it is, you know, for us to use whatever kind of cultural, political, social skills that we do have to kind of like to decolonize this world, you know, like, and we live in a country that is so inextricably connected, you know, to so many different iterations of imperialism and violence. And yeah, I guess education and education through music, I think, is a really beautiful and powerful pathway to individual and collective liberation. So yeah, that's my little bit.
I think we'll go home now. Yes. You just said yes. And that like really beautifully leads us on to like the heart of this conversation, right? So music as a point of rupture and reconciliation, like the healing, that collective liberation that you just ended on, like the tool of justice. Like how does that show up in your daily practice? Like how do you use music as a tool to drive forward your work and the conversations that we need to have? I'm gonna throw that one. Well, let's go back around again. Throw that to Cassie.
Can you repeat the question, please? Sorry.
Well, just thinking on the like heartbeat of the conversation, right? So music as a point of rupture and reconciliation. Like, how does that show up in your practice? So, like, how have you used your skill set and your knowledge and expertise to rupture or reconcile for a movement around racial justice?
I would say something that I think maybe brought a lot of attention to some of the stuff that I write is that I am quite direct about highlighting certain issues, in particular to do with people of the Caribbean and African diaspora who are growing up in the UK. Certain issues that I believe are often swept under the carpet, because we live in a British society, in particular British culture, is very much about hiding things, is very much about facades and sort of putting up all these barriers around the truth and around things that don't allow us to culturally or socially move forwards in terms of acceptance and in terms of an actual community. So a lot of the stuff that I write about is an attempt to educate people that like educate most of the general public that possibly don't even think about certain things to do with how we're treated, and like the emotional and mental toll that a lot of the invisible barriers that British culture has have on minorities, really. So I do this both through writing music, through my band, and I make a point of explaining the compositions on stage to people. Like, I remember one of our second gig was in a pub somewhere, and I had written this track about World War II Black and brown soldiers, like, because that was before they had put up that statue to sort of tell the world that they were there and celebrate that they'd, or celebrate honor that they'd given their lives to defend this country. And there were these two white men at the front who sort of were like, oh, okay then, sorry, when I explained that kind of meaning behind the tune. But that's kind of what I want to do. I want to be able people to feel uncomfortable, because I think these kinds of truths need to be highlighted and they need to be spoken about. And at least even that kind of poor reaction was a point of starting a conversation that needs to be had. Okay, so I do a lot of workshops in jazz, and I make a point of trying to explain what jazz is and where it came from as an improvised space, as a way of people connecting with each other as musicians, but also as a way of explaining the history behind it, because once again the UK is kind of glossed over where jazz music has come from. So I kind of use those spaces to ensure that from a young age people are aware of how music can be used to start conversations, and how music has been used to start conversations about racial justice and about I guess as a way of connecting when the rest of society isn't allowing you to connect with them, if that makes sense. So I guess that's how I kind of, relating to the word rupture, by starting conversations and making people uncomfortable, because I think that's the starting point. In terms of reconciliation, I think just as an improviser, like it's always a space, a cathartic space, when improvising with other musicians, irrespective of what the subject matter is, but especially when it's something that is very close to your lived experience. So for example, songs that I've written that celebrate your existence, or songs that I've written that talk about how your existence is not accepted. That as an improviser, you're telling your story constantly. So when we're on stage, that becomes a very open space where we can connect without even having to say anything, or just get out floods of emotion. And that to me is reconciliation, because I find improvised music in particular is very a healing space, and a very honest and open space where there is a lot of communication going on, but not just with the musicians on the stage, is also that connection with the audience. So you're sharing an experience there, and you don't always have to have used words to connect with them, and to express your feelings about things, really.
Absolutely, thank you, Cassie. I'm seeing a lot of nods. Does anyone have anything to add or riff off of what Cassie's just shared?
Yeah, I'd like to, because I follow Cassie like a stalker. So, and I'm super hyper aware of how much emotional labor Cassie does. And as much as you are doing enormously important work, the impact on you is 100% there. So I think it's important to acknowledge that too, that you are, you know, in this in a big way. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like, yeah, we're talking about rupture, we're talking about reconciliation, but you know, based on what Cassie's explained, I'm trying to understand here what we mean by both, in terms of, you know, for me, if we talk about reconciliation, that's usually between two equal and opposite sides, or two people in a relationship or something like that. And if we go back to the question of emotional labor, what we tend to see, it is mostly Black musicians and Black organizations doing the carrying in a situation where the reconciliation effort shouldn't be coming from them. Yeah, so I'm very kind of vocal about the fact that it isn't for Black musicians and organizations to do all the carrying here, or even the majority of the carrying. I don't believe, when I talk about reconciliation, I'm not talking about white forgiveness here. That I think that is or white education, or all the rest of it. I feel that there needs to be a really strong call for white-led organizations to do their own work. I mean, for me, I'm you know, that I will never let them off the hook from that point of view. And you know, I have to say that for me, rupture, yes, is definitely about creating the discomfort that Cassie talks about. It's so vital. But also for me, I make my participation conditional, and sometimes that causes rupture. Yeah, if I am asked to do something with an organization and I don't like how that organization is run and how representative that project may be or anything like that, I will make my participation conditional on that changing, or at least efforts made towards that changing. And yes, sometimes that causes rupture and sometimes that is exclusion and all the rest of it. But gosh, I don't know, Cassie, whenever you talk about your experiences, I always remember that absolutely epic thread on Facebook where you raised you raised the blood pressure of primarily white male jazz musicians who for some reason absolutely lost their heads at you saying something which I remember was as bit banal as jazz is black music or something like that. I can't even remember exactly what it was about, but yeah, anyway, you know, you have my heart and I'm always in awe of you. So I just want you to be aware of your own self-care and all this. That's it.
Thank you.
Beautiful to witness. Alya, thank you for sharing some really incredible things. And I am with you in terms of white organizations carrying the labor and doing the work. And, you know, the focus today looking at allyship. Last year, we saw a performance of allyship in black boxes on social media and statements of intent, you know, and a lot of the language and words that are so crucial to this work suddenly became quite popularized. And in a way, and no, I'm not going to say that it lost meaning, but seeing kind of statements like it's not enough to not be racist, you have to actively be anti-racist is like, great. And like, and what? And so I'm interested in like bringing that into the space today, like as we're moving, as we're talking about equity and about like the labor on Black people, on global majority people, how, because we can't win this fight alone, and it shouldn't be just on us to move towards reconciliation. Like, what is it that we need from white people in order to step into that space of allyship? What is it that we need or want them to be doing to step towards reconciliation, to step further towards reconciliation? Alice, I'm so sorry, I'm going to throw that question right at you.
Oh, of course, and it's perfectly appropriate. Yeah, no, it's yeah, it's very moving to hear that exchange, Alya and Cassie. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it put me in mind a little bit of what I think your next question might be, which is about the term authentic allyship, right? And whether things are authentic versus whether they're performative. And I think that's probably where white people need to look at, because it's not possible to maintain positive action. It's not possible to maintain you know, the intentions that you say you might have if they're not genuine. They'll burn away as soon as they arrive. And I think what we have to look at is actually it's a much more heartfelt thing. It's about rehumanizing everyone around us. You know, it's much deeper than being able to use the right terminology, for example. I mean, like, I remember talking to a good friend about this, who was talking about how he felt that, you know, that there were sometimes people who he knew who were really good at kind of using you know, kind of very current terminology and ways of describing things and saying the right thing and stuff, but you can kind of feel whether there's an emotional investment in that or not. And And I don't know, I think we've just got to try to make a space where people aren't afraid to just actually work through their internal prejudices, which we've got. You know, we've got to find a way to learn about unpicking that isn't done out of fear, isn't done out of sort of fear of being held accountable for things, but actually just genuinely because it's better for everybody. And I think there was something, Aditi, that you touched on earlier that really resonated with me, and Cassie as well, about sometimes it's not necessarily to do with words, but it can be a kind of it's a kind of a message that's intrinsically held in the mystery of the music that we play. It's like all of that information is there, I believe, and like I'm learning that as I go along. But I remember when I was really young, when I first got introduced to jazz through a great New Orleans singer called Lillian Butte, and she I think her sort of most prominent the most prominent impression that I got from her was just this incredible feeling of inclusion of everybody in the room, and also just within the band, just kind of witnessing for the first time. I didn't really understand it at that age, but as I get older, I begin to get glimpses of what it really means. But it's like the example of how we can treat each other as a society is held within the microcosm of a jazz band. You know, it's like everybody has their place, everybody has their job, their role, their responsibility. Everybody supports one another, expresses themselves, and takes care of one another. And in a way, like, if we can practice that, I don't know, like, the more people who get to witness that, whether they're watching or in it, there are lessons. And I don't think it's too unrealistic or quite kind of fantastical to think that that's not obvious once you witness that care of each other. I was reading a book recently by what's his name, Rupert Sheldrake, which is called Science and Spiritual Practices. It's a bit of a tangent, but there was something really interesting about our society's like lack of ritual and ceremony, as we see the sort of decrease of religion, and how humans intrinsically need that sense of ceremony and ritual, and that actually it doesn't always, I think sometimes it's like, okay, if you're going to be involved, partake in something, you have to understand everything intimately and be able to kind of justify and defend and be an advocate. But actually, and in some situations that is necessary, but actually sometimes it's the doing, the copying, the imitation, the taking part that leads you to the spiritual understanding, right? It can go in both directions. And that's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit when it comes to making music in a not just in gig settings, but in more kind of communal settings. Like, how can you just literally use the tool of music to make sure that everybody in that space feels like their story is represented somehow, feels like their feelings are heard somehow. And there's lots of really positive ways and practical ways of doing that. It's not just a kind of fleeting idea. It's not fantastical. It's a real thing, and the answer is in the music itself, I believe.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think those of us who are appreciators of music, like, I think it's incumbent on us, non-Black people of color and white folk as well, to deeply study the music, right? And to acknowledge that, the music that we love, Black music, it has deep, deep genealogies, right? And, like, all of the conversations that we're having now, like, they've been had before. Do you know what I mean? Like, look at Eugene McDaniel's Outlaw record. Like, he's talking about everything under the sun. He's talking about, the creation of the United States of America, right? Through slavery, through pillaging lands and a people. You know, he's like, you know, showing solidarity with indigenous people of the Americas. He's talking about microaggressions. He's talking about all of these different things. And I think what pains me is that some people could listen to that record and not kind of sit with any of those things, right? And yes, music is opaque in many respects. And if you know, you know, right? And I think Fela said something along those lines. But I kind of feel like we need to know. Do you know what I mean? And if we don't get to that point of realizing that we need to know, then, and I know this might sound harsh, but then we don't have a right to be in those spaces. Like, you know, it is harsh, but I think there's a truth to that, right? Like, how dare we kind of, you know, consume a music? How dare we consume the cultures of a people, but not acknowledge where it's come from, right? And not kind of not view or respect or engage with the people who have made the music with as much love or care or compassion as we do the music itself. Like, it's kind of fucked up. Do you know what I mean? And like, I mean, post the BLM uprisings of last summer, you know, there's so much performance, you know, everywhere I go, there's a performativity, and it's really, really frustrating because nothing is changing. Like, people just want to be seen as being like kind of radical or politically conscious, but what the fuck are you doing? Do you know what I mean? And why is it that just because you read like 3 books on race, you know, that doesn't make you radical, that doesn't make you conscious, and you're still not treating the Black people who live in your community with love or care or respect or even with acknowledgement? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's the fucked up thing, you know. Like, there's such an abundant discourse on anti-racism, but what is it to be anti-racist, to embody that, right? To rupture it within the everyday. Yeah. And I think that's something that like that I don't see taking place in festival spaces, for instance, you know, in the way that like Black musicians very often are exoticized. They might not be paid on time, you know, they might not be paid the same amount of money as their white counterparts. All of the, like, the ecology, the ecosystem, let's talk about that. Do you know what I mean? And as you were saying, Alya, let's talk about power, right? We can only get to a point of reconciliation when power is equitably distributed. And we're not at that point at the moment, right? And I deeply, you know, I really believe in the power of individual work and internal work, because, you know, the internal is inextricably connected to like all of these structural and systemic things. But we need to focus on structural shit as well. Do you know what I mean? And like, how is the music industry gonna kind of reconfigure or reimagine itself with Black liberation being the sun that it orbits around? Let's have that conversation. Music industry. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, I think these are the conversations that need to be had, because then shit will change, right? So I guess like we have these conversations, and there are many elephants in the room that people are afraid to talk about. But let's talk about this stuff, you know? And I think someone said before, like these conversations are discomforting, they're uncomfortable, and they can be alienating because we haven't traversed those conversational terrains yet. But let's do it, you know, and let's be open to do it. And also, like, you know, the answers, the tools, the skills, they're not always very obvious, right? And I think, you know, I think Cassie and Alya, you were talking about, you know, how there's this kind of pressure almost on Black people to provide the answers, to provide the solutions, you know, as if, and it's almost like, well, if we knew, then all of that stuff would be done already. Like, racism is a constantly mutating monster. Do you know what I mean? Every second it's changing and it's shifting. And yeah, I mean, I think, and I do think music is like kind of fundamental and integral in kind of in rupturing and refusing coloniality and like the highly racialized gaze. But it requires, like quoting Fred Moten, it requires like everyone to understand that colonialism, racism, anti-Blackness fucks us up as much as it does Black people as well, right? In different ways, of course, but these systems of power, like, they're not good for anyone. And until we kind of come to that understanding, I don't think that things will shift and change in radical, loving, and, you know, decolonial ways.
I mean, Aditi, you are, first of all, you're incredible. I'm so happy we met here. I love it. The radical thing is something that I think isn't talked about enough. What seems to be happening with some groups, and even with some advocates for change, not all, is, and I love that, you know, Sade, your organization very explicitly uses the word radical, because it is absolutely what's required, is we get stuck in the same conversations. Aditi was just saying, you know, we've had these conversations. These conversations been being had, you know, for time, and we are stuck in this cycle of talking about diversity, which for me is akin to begging for space. I think we should be done with the whole concept of diversity, full stop. I think diversity should be a word that leaves our whole vocabulary forever, because it isn't about that. It isn't about you, a white-led, white-run arts organization, you know, puts a few Black bodies into your production, or a few Black bodies into your roster, or a few Black bodies into your festival. That's not progress for me. Representation matters, you know, I know it matters. It matters to audiences, it matters to up and coming musicians. And so I'm not, you know, I love representation, but I think when arts organizations are more focused on ticking this box that, yeah, well, we've got, this year we have 1 Black composer and we have 2 Black artists. Like, what more do you want? You know, and that is the piece for me that has to end. Because what more do we want is actual equity. And if you have actual equity, you don't have to worry about the rest. You know, it will sort itself out. There are jazz big bands in this city, in London, with not a single Black jazz musician in them. How is that even possible? Let alone a publicly funded one, or one that's received public funding. How is that even possible? So I feel like, you know, we allow a lot of things to take place and continue because, you know, we're chucked a few little kind of, oh, you know, well, look at this and we've done this and we've done that. Well, no, because I remember having this conversation with the same organizations for years now. Every time I go and see, for example, the London Symphony Orchestra at the Barbican, I write them a letter. They hate my guts, but I write them a letter and I say, mate, what's going on? You're the London Symphony Orchestra. There is not a single Black musician in your whole orchestra, whether that's 75 piece or 100 piece. There's not a single Black musician. What's going on? And they'll come back to me with some blah blah about grassroots efforts. You know,
on that, I think also just because I did the LSO Panifnic scheme, and after I wrote to them and said there was not a single Black composer who was a teacher involved, and I told them that you need to get a teacher in, and I got Shirley Thompson in to be my mentor for that, because I think it's just ridiculous that you're trying to, you know, make all of the composers diverse, but behind the scenes it's not. So I think there's a lot of like focus on the face, or like the musicians being diverse or different cultures and all this kind of thing. But I think the only way, going back to the authentic allyship thing, because I also called out my old university on this as well, but like behind the scenes and moving up also needs to have different voices in. And if you're an authentic ally, you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that's also why a lot of things don't change. A lot of people don't want to address those uncomfortable feelings, really. You need to be welcoming to being told, no, you're wrong in this, because when it's coming from a person of color, it's never, and it's not an attack. It's like, it's just telling you, this is how it is. This is my experience. This is what's wrong. And this is what needs to change. But the people that will say they're allies but really are not. They will get so uncomfortable and like offended by it that those become the focus more than actually initiating change. And so they might put a few faces at the front of things but not actually do properly change things behind the scenes, really. So there's a lot of inauthentic allyship from people who sort of say words, put pictures up, even booking black musicians on stage, but it's not good enough, really. It has to really go behind that. But I also agree with what Alya was saying about you know, the idea of diversity, kind of like, and sort of like, it is almost like begging and like making safer spaces maybe that are led by people of color. And I don't know if this is what you were saying, but like my interpretation is kind of like making black led or people of color led institutions to do those things, because those things are kind of going to be understood without having to have conversations and try and barge and force your way into somewhere that's not actually listening, is going to put their feelings before actually doing the right thing.
It's symptom led, so like, it's just hearing what you're saying, it's what we're talking about here is symptoms to a systemic problem. So without the analysis and the interrogation of how a structure is formed, how policies and practices and language are formed to continue dehumanizing Black people, you're just adding a plaster on top of a wound. Like, and so when I'm just, the response that you got back from the LSO, like, it does not surprise me, because what, in terms of, if we're talking about diversity and representation and like optics, what we're talking about there is visibility. So within a power structure, where is visible, what is visible on stage, is visible outreach, it's visible in any roles that are like outward looking. But what's not in the face of what we can all see, what's invisible, is what happens behind the scenes. And that's where the structure and the system sits. And that's what needs to address. I realize I'm taking over because I'm being so passionate about this too. But like, I genuinely believe like it's a failure of imagination. It's the idea that you can do a tokenistic hire, or you can do anything to avoid sitting in the uncomfortable, anything. Because the thing is, anytime that you're prioritizing your comfort, it's over somebody else's safety. Like, that's the difference. Like, so inviting you to lean into a conversation that makes you feel uncomfortable, like, it's not for you. That's not why you're doing it. Like, you're doing it so that Black people and global majority people and anybody who doesn't benefit from a system is safe.
Can I chip in?
Yeah.
I totally hear exactly what all of you are saying. Like, you know, I can't disagree with any of it. I think there's something as well, which is to do with the uncomfortable thing, which is to do with like nobody wants to be the bad guy in their own narrative, right, in their own story. So if you're a white person and you want to be the good guy in your story, right, you will find a way to sort of convince yourself that you're doing something right or something helpful. And then as people have alluded to before, you know, then perhaps you're kind of off the hook to yourself. But actually, I think maybe there's a cause now for white people actually just not to get too involved, and just, you know, they don't need to be the one hiring. They don't need to be involved at all. It's more about actually there just needs to be more platform available, more resources available, that's better shared, and actually, you know, I don't think people of color need the direction or the kind of I don't know how to phrase it, like the systems or the organizations that are already existing. You know, they don't need to be holding the reins, if you know what I mean. I think it's about just kind of like letting go sometimes.
I would say that I don't know if I misinterpret what you've said, but I would say that maybe it is kind of white people maybe do need to hold the reins, just because a lot of the problems are white problems, like a lot of, you know, not being diverse or not talking about these things, it's not a black or person of colors it's not our issue really. Like, it's like all the racism is like, it's a white problem. So I feel like white people do need to lead these conversations. White people do need to be at the forefront of them, but it's just in the way of how it's done. And in terms of institutionally, like it's more just accepting that, yes, you are going to feel uncomfortable. Here are the stories from the people that you're mishandling and treating wrong, but you need to go and sort that out over there. And then I'm going to stay over here in my safe space with like other people of color in led institutions and do my stuff over here instead. Otherwise it's going back to that sort of putting the onus on and putting the emotional labor on people that aren't creating those issues.
Yeah, no,
really.
I totally agree. And I think what I was saying was not to preclude the labour issue. I fully subscribe to that. You know, there's no doubt about that. I think what I mean is about kind of just getting out of the way and not conflating performative allyship with wanting to be the good guy in your own story. I think that's kind of what I mean. It's a long one, but yeah.
The saviorism, and I guess at the heart of like what I'm hearing as well is around the intention. Like, why are you doing it? Are you doing it to unseat yourself so that you can share power, or are you doing it so that you can be, you know, so that it's your name at the front of some diversity scheme or whatever it is? And I think, speaking to your point, Cassie, like it's absolutely vital that white people do have these conversations, that they develop their vocabulary and the tools to hold themselves accountable in order to move this forward, because we can't do it without them. And if in that process of having a conversation they realize that they need to de-seat themselves, that's okay. But I think when you get to the point where you can't even say the word black, or you're saying, do you know what, we're going to set up a BAME group and get them to do it. Like, I think between the two of you, like, that's the problem. I'm just so conscious of time and how much I've enjoyed this, and I want to talk to you all day. If we were doing our outro, like, what are we saying to our audience who are hopefully still listening? What are we saying to them? I'm joking. They're all there. They're tuned in. And what are we saying to them today? To what's the takeaway piece that you'd like to leave them with? I'll go to you, Aditi.
Oh, there's a lot. There's so much. I would say, you know, and I'm guessing a lot of the people listening or watching this in some capacity love music, you know, and if you love music, listen, please listen to what the musicians are trying to communicate. Read the social, economic, political, historical notes of the music that you love, and be in conversation with it. Don't just consume it passively, be actively involved, be actively in dialogue and in conversation with the music. And also maybe kind of think about allyship as sacrifice, you know? Like, this work isn't easy. Do you know what I mean? The work of liberation, of decolonization isn't easy, and it requires sacrifice and inconvenience to those who have power and privilege. So what does that look like for you?
Thank you. Yeah. Alya.
Oh gosh. Did you
Go,
say
go,
Alya or
go,
Alice?
Go. If you've got one, go.
Oh no, go on, Alice.
I think you sound more ready. Go for it.
Yeah, that's.
I was actually, my first line is going to be, where do I begin? So I don't think so. I think we need to get past the personal. I think some of the obstacles that we're facing here is that people are taking things that are said personally. It really isn't about you. It's about the system in which we're operating. And music is beautiful. Music is liberation. Music is freedom. Music is all the best things in life all at once. And we all deserve to take part in it on equal terms. And that's not happening currently. So what's happening is a lot of the people whose heritages and pasts are contributing hugely to the music that you enjoy are not enjoying and having access in the same way that white people are. And there's something, for me, deeply wrong about that. So you've got to, when you hear these conversations like this, you need to try and put yourself aside. You need to remove the personal and the sense of offense and shame that can be carried in these conversations, and become an ally and work alongside people on changing the structural circumstances that we all exist in, and it will be to all of our benefit. So we got to end the myth of meritocracy in music. It is absolutely not true. If you are good at what you do, then you have the same opportunities. Absolute rubbish, rubbish. Yeah, because we all carry implicit prejudice, and the decision makers carry implicit prejudice. And where they locate excellence is usually in whiteness. And there are so many things here that we need to talk about and unravel. And you need to be open to that conversation. No one is taking anything from you, quite the opposite. No one is asking you to feel ashamed of yourself, quite the opposite. It's a hugely empowering experience to go beyond the personal and become an authentic ally. So that's the invitation from me.
You, Cassie, Alice.
I mean, I thought what Aditi and Alya said already was great. I don't know if I have, especially though what Aditi said about, you know, not just as a white person listening to music, you know, it might make you dance and you might move to it and connect with it in some kind of emotional capacity, but like, don't just like what Aditi said about not just consuming it, but actually also listening to what it's saying, because I think the word consume, that's done a lot with, you know, Black people and people of color. You're like taking, but not actually connecting with it in the way that it's intended to connect. So just being open to having conversations and being open to feeling uncomfortable, and not putting your uncomfortable feelings at the forefront of things, and also not feeling I guess like beating yourself up for not for getting things wrong, or for not understanding certain things. You will get loads of things wrong and you won't understand things, that's just a given, but you need to still remain open to receiving the messages that are going to move society forwards and move us towards a space where things are on a more equal playing field, really. I guess that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Alice, closing piece. No pressure.
I mean, there isn't really much else to add, you know, after those amazing statements. I guess I would just say, if you are someone who has resources and privilege, think about how you can better share that, and keep your heart open as far as you can.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, all of you. It was a real pleasure being here today. I could just continue this conversation. So yeah, it was a joy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you, everyone.